Good morning, everybody. So I've been home in Trinidad and Tobago for the last 8 years. I've been doing organizing, activism, advocacy in different frameworks for most of my adult life. And I tend to avoid foregrounding the fact that most of my adult life was spent outside of Trinidad and Tobago, very deliberately. And today is one of the first times that I've decided that I actually want to kind of bring that back into the frame in a kind of strategic way. I came back home to join an exciting movement that had inspired me and made me feel very jealous. In 1997, I was one of a handful of people who were not living and working in the region who got invited to an event in Curaçao where about 70 activists from, I think, maybe a total of 17 Caribbean territories who'd been meeting and talking over the past year formed an entity called CFLAG, the Caribbean Forum for Lesbians, All Sexuals, and Gays. And I broke down in tears and thought about, oh my God, if I had not gone away and I was home, I would be part of this work and I would be able to own it. And CFLAG actually founded not long after it started. This was before internet penetration of the region, and faced real challenges in keeping a structure going. But its vision, which was inspired in part by the work that the HIV epidemic had done around sexual consciousness, but also the funding that the HIV epidemic had catalyzed, and the importance it had assigned to at least communities of gay men, and broader than that, communities of trans and bisexual and lesbian people. And those funds had helped support the event that UNAIDS and other entities concerned about public health in the region had also invested in. CFLAG found itself being reborn in 2006 through the efforts of, an HIV region-wide framework, as well as a domestic organization that had formed shortly after the Jamaicans who were in Curaçao went back home. JFLAG, the Jamaican Forum for Lesbians, All Sexuals, and Gays, you get the connection and name. And I was asked to join the steering committee of CFLAG, which again went through this brief renaissance and didn't succeed. I came back home at the beginning of 2007 with the intention of doing this transnationality thing. It was on my bios that I was living, I'd done work on migration, and I was very proud of this framework of transnationality, blah, blah. Well, it didn't really work out that way. First I couldn't get employed to support the transnational lifestyle. But a series of events happened in Trinidad and Tobago and regionally that I kind of want to just frame for you. And we'll hopefully be able to talk about more in the discussion about what they mean. So there was this regional organizing that was happening in spurts and waves, region-wide organizing connected to HIV, fostering in some ways domestic groups. After the regional organizing failed to sustain itself, JFLAG was born. The Society Against Sexual Orientation Discrimination was born in Guyana in response to an opportunity to include sexual orientation protections in the Constitution there. We found domestic groups springing up across the region. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, the Equal Opportunity Bill, introduced, I think, initially in 1998, also found increased advocacy and conversation around sexual citizenship. But there had been efforts prior to that, HIV-related and not, primarily by men, around forming organizations. So a number of them were plagued by issues of class differences. And then in the more recent arc, international organizing came into the frame. and advocates who had been successful passing a resolution around human rights and sexual orientation and gender identity at the Organization of American States General Assembly invited a representative from Trinidad and Tobago to participate and contacted those of us who had international connections. We suggested Angela Francis, a young woman who had started a then, well, I think it's still a secret Facebook group called Velvet Underground, that then had the magical number of 750 members. And it was the closest thing to a mass base, a mass LGBT base of any kind, locally. So Angela went, and her calculation was that she'd get all excited and inspired, she'd come home, some kind of organizing would get sparked, and things would come off of this plateau that had been stuck on, where things were good enough here that there wasn't really enough of a pressure to organize. So we went along, we'd become the social LGBT capital of the Caribbean, but there was very little policy advocacy. So we planned this meeting for when Angela came back. 2 days before that, the PNM's then Gender Minister, Marlene McDonald, announced that a gender policy that had died because of opposition to its homosexuality and abortion provisions years before, and IGDS played a central role in that, and we can talk about it a little bit more in the discussion. It was being reintroduced, to everyone's surprise, and the media asked, well, so what about the homosexuality and the abortion stuff? And she said, and there's actually a line in the policy, that the policy does not include measures. So this was the Thursday after Cabinet. It appeared in the paper on Friday. We met on Saturday morning. Angela forgot the meeting. But the rest of us in the room responded to that moment and formed a domestic group called CAISO, the Coalition Advocating for Inclusion, in response to this notion of not including sexual orientation. Initially, our focus was the gender policy. Now, who is the we, and how did the we happen to meet? 6 months after I arrived back in Trinidad on July 4th, 2007, the papers reported about a case of 20-something-year-old, I think he was at the time, young man who had been arrested by police and taunted because of his sexual orientation, stripped, left in a cell naked, and he decided to get a lawyer and go to the High Court and sue, and lo and behold, he won. Judge wasn't particularly friendly. The judge didn't find that his discrimination was on the basis of sexual orientation, but he was a gay man, and he won, and the media reported that. And all the comments and a lot of the public reaction was positive. And a few days later, he appeared in the Saturday paper with a signature rag over his shoulder, looking totally working class, and with a caption, "Give gays equal rights." Kenty Mitchell. So, Guyanese guy who was living in Trinidad and Tobago, and I, and a few women we knew, got a group of people together on Emancipation Day to meet with Kenty and his partner, his longtime partner, Kino. And it was the first time in Trinidad and Tobago, in that group's experience, that they'd been in the same room in many instances to organize with people across gender and across class. And they made a determination to start a group called For Change, looking at Section 4 of the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. Again, the organizing was not successful, but that was a group of people who came together in 2009 when Angela came back from the OAS General Assembly. And so I lay out those various pieces, so when we talk in the discussion around cyber activism and grassroots organizing, that we can pull some of those pieces together. I wanted to close, because CAISO has turned 5, and we have played a role in the last few years in revitalizing what's now called CariFLAGS, the Caribbean Forum for Liberation and Acceptance of Genders and Sexualities, a region-wide framework. And we've rooted it now in organizations like ourselves and SASOD and JFLAG, and not just in individual activists. And we've got US State Department money, $500,000 of it over the last 2 years, that has built this regional movement. and has supported the work in many ways that CAISO does. We've built the work that we're doing on a couple pillars and ideas that I hope we get to discuss. One is the notion of nation, a notion that we're rejecting international prescriptions, that we're building an indigenous movement, and an unorthodox movement in some ways. Another is an alliance with feminism. The gender systems are what oppress us all, and that feminism is a generative strategy, and feminist nationalism is what we've often talked about. And this notion of movement, that movements have politics. They aren't just assemblages of people and individuals. And particularly regionally, we want to have a shared politics in facing the world. That politics requires analysis, that we have to understand the world in order to change it. And most recently, we've shifted our mission considerably because we realized that asking people to organize or asking people even to seek redress requires a certain resilience and capacity, and that we've got that our commitment has to be to restorative justice. And we built a program using clinical and legal professional skills to do reparative work and preventative work so the communities are more whole and more engaged and more committed to doing organizing and advocacy. So I just wanted to give that framework, and then hopefully we can talk much more about what that means in the discussion.